Fantastic. Thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me with you today, and great to be with you guys online as well. Trust that today will be a blessing to you. So, I love what God is doing here in Harrogate. Really, really love it. And as you'll pick up as we go along, I think there's some awesome potential here with what you're trying to do together as churches. I love your town, and I'm excited for what God is going to do amongst you. What he's already done is fantastic, but I think there's more, a lot more yet to come. So we're thinking about creating the possible whilst fighting the impossible. A lot of us feel like we're in the trenches right now. We're dug in. We're thinking about how do we keep going? How do we keep adapting new strategies, new innovations? It's almost like survival is a win right now. If we're just surviving, if we're just keeping going, if we're just staying connected with our churches, that's a win. And it is. One of the things that tends to happen when we're in survival mode is that mission often drops off the radar. You're all about churches working together for the sake of mission. And I want to hopefully encourage you this morning to keep thinking missionally. I love words, and I was intrigued by the meaning of the name Harrogate. You probably know this. There's a couple of Old Norse roots in that name. One's to do with a heap of stones. Probably it meant a cairn originally. I think I couldn't help but think of the living stones, the pile of living stones that God has brought together, which is the church in Harrogate, and gate, which means a road or a street. And so I was thinking about that dwelling of God in the Spirit that Paul talks about in Ephesians, and thinking like, you know, you are like a pointer, a gateway, a street to God's dwelling. And the thought came to my mind that one day people would come from all over this nation to see what God is doing in Harrogate, because not just Christians, but non-Christians, people who don't know Jesus, because they have heard that it's a place where you can meet with God, where you can encounter Jesus. And I just think, you know, wouldn't it be great to embrace something of that hope, not just for our sakes in this town, but for the sake of our nation, who we could become. Kairos Connection is the network of leaders, the family of churches that I kind of have some involvement in leading and directing, and it's my privilege to do that. I love it. It's what gets me out of bed in the morning. It's about helping churches put mission and discipleship at the very center of church life and back in the hands of ordinary church members. Mission and discipleship, because in my mind, they are the things that are most fundamental to the life of any church. And often they are the things that church leaders find the most difficult to do effectively. Difficult to be effectively missional, and difficult to truly make disciples. We often talk about the fact that Jesus didn't tell us to go and build churches, make churches, or plant churches. He told us to go and make disciples. And how are we doing that? That's the questions that we ask all the time in Kairos Connection. How are we doing? So some of the resources, many of the resources revolve around those topics. There's some details of the training courses that we run online so that they are available and accessible without anybody having to come to you. There's 3 courses: Brighter, which is about training members in missional confidence; Inside Out, which is around turning small groups inside out to become missional; and there's Reimagined Church, which the book goes alongside, transitioning a whole church to a new way of putting mission and discipleship at the very center and growing and multiplying communities of believers on mission together. The other book I'll mention later, which is Bride. There's also a small booklet there with 17 tools for mission and discipleship. It was actually, the idea for it came from one of our churches in the south of England. And we took his basic idea, we developed it and expanded it, and just put a little toolbox together. So many churches are using that. I'll mention the other resources in a minute. There is also just a little flyer about Kairos Connection if you want to find out a bit more about it. I want to say this before I say anything else. If you're still standing, you are doing so well. I just want to think there's a massive, well done over you. You guys in the room here, you guys online, there's a well done ringing over your heads from the Father today. He is so delighted you are still standing. The fact you're in the room here today, you're online here today, means you're still moving forward. You're still going strong. You haven't given up. And that is quite an achievement. I think the enemy would like to shift us away from our confidence of our position in Christ, our purpose in the gospel, or our partnership in the town. But you guys are still standing. You're my heroes. You really are. And I would love to see this happening all across the country. One of the things that actually is unique about the Harrogate Hub and your partnership for mission is exactly that. It's a partnership for mission. There's about 130 other unity movements in towns and cities around this nation, but very, very few of them are actually uniting for mission. And I think that's very, very special. But, Paul said, having done all, stand firm. Stand firm, Ephesians 6. I love this quote from Newt Gingrich, the American politician. He said, perseverance is the hard work you do after you get tired of doing the hard work you already did. Okay. But you've got a great, great vision. Took this straight off your website. People in Harrogate knowing the love of God and community, playing our part in the Great Commission. One of my dreams, and it probably won't happen in my lifetime, it may happen in some of yours, is that we actually get the job done. We complete the Great Commission. And I think the opportunity is for any one place where leaders working together with the blessing that comes from unity, Psalm 133, actually getting the job done. That within a generation, Jesus said, this generation that sees all these things happen will not pass away until I return. I believe there will be a generation, and I believe it could be in a localized place, it could be global, that will actually get the job done. Ultimately, we'll see Jesus return. It's a great, great vision. Let's not give up. Let's not lose heart. Don't get weary in doing good, Paul said to the Galatians. Your coalition of leaders, your partnership, your friendships, your mutual commitment has incredible potential. And I believe you're just scratching the surface of it right now. That unity that revolves around the people in the room and online today, that commitment to one another and your unity around purpose has incredible potential. It is, I think, unique. So let's just let our imaginations run for a minute. What if the devil meant this whole scenario that we've been living through for the last 6 months? Maybe he meant it for evil, but maybe God meant it for good. No one's saying God sent it, no one's saying God orchestrated it, but maybe he's using it for good. Wouldn't it be amazing if you were the first town in this nation to effectively, within a generation, complete the Great Commission? What if the vast majority of active churches committed to working together to see Harrogate reached with and transformed by the gospel? What if within 10 years you were able to saturate this town with prayer, with gospel presence, with gospel demonstrations, serving the poorest and the weakest, and with gospel communication, so that every single person, man, woman, and child, actually knew someone whose life had been changed by Jesus, knew a local group of believers that were praying for and serving their neighborhood, knew where they could go to get spiritual bread, knew where there was a place they could jump on a spiritual journey to find faith, and knew and understood that there was a God who loved them and had a purpose for their lives. To do that within a 10-year time frame. Sometimes, we've put a 10-year time frame on what we're doing in the Liverpool city region. Not because we'll necessarily complete it, but because, if you don't have a time frame, things just stretch away into the distance forever. Once you put a deadline on things, actually there's an urgency about this, because there is an urgency about the gospel with people going to a lost eternity. What if in 10 years you guys got the job done? We'd be cheering you on from Liverpool. We'd be learning from you. We're already learning from you. We took your idea of 24/7 during lockdown. We pinched that for ourselves in Liverpool. We connected with 24/7. We only did a week of it. We weren't quite as ambitious as you guys. But, involving churches all across the city region. We'd be cheering you on if you got the job done. We'd say, come and teach us how to do it in Liverpool. Wouldn't it be amazing? So let me ask this question. Are we seeing a problem, or are we seeing the opportunity? And what I'm saying to a lot of people at the moment is, let's not focus on what we can't do. Let's focus on what we can do. And to do that, we're going to need a change in our thinking. We're going to need a change in the way we use resources. We're going to need a change in our focus and our priorities. We're going to need to change our thinking from in here to out there. We're going to need to pioneer new ways of being and doing church. And we're going to need to see crisis as opportunity. I believe we are living through a massive, massive Kairos moment. And we call ourselves Kairos Connection because we're around connecting with each other and with God in the Kairos, is the breaking in of God in a moment in time. That's what the Kairos means, a moment in time. And scripturally, it's the moment in time where God breaks in. The time, Kairos, is now. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. God is wanting heaven to break into our time-space world. And we need to grab hold of those Kairoses, those Kairos moments, those words from heaven, which we will act upon, we will respond to, and we will implement. We will do what God tells us to do. Because when we take hold of such a Kairos moment, everything changes. Whether it's the smallest personal Kairos for our own individual lives, whether it's for our church or for our town, or for our nation. We're living through this wake-up moment. It's a wake-up call to the church. We cannot just keep hoping and postponing plans until we are back to normal. We have to begin to think, what could a new normal look like? What's God saying to us as the church in Harrogate? What's the new thing? What's the breaking in of heaven? The kingdom of heaven being at hand, seeking to break in through this Kairos moment. Are we hearing and responding to his word? I love that introduction that David gave us earlier, particularly for Mary, who said, "Be it done to me according to your word." Can we just repeat that phrase together? Okay? Be it done to me according to your word. And now let's change it for us. Be it done to us, okay? Be it done to us according to your word. That's a confession. That's a declaration that together we will listen for what God is saying. And I'm praying that either because of things that I say or in spite of things that I say, that God will break in this morning, that you will begin to hear something fresh from heaven, a fresh sound from heaven, the Kairos moment. I'm fascinated by the fact that a Kairos has become part of common language. I've discovered it in an online secular dictionary. It's been one of the things, the church has originated this idea of a Kairos moment. It's now in a secular dictionary, and it's described as this: a propitious moment for decision or action. A propitious moment for decision or action. That's what we are in the middle of right now. Now, I just want to touch on two key areas this morning that I think we need to really think seriously about, dig into, and it will have implications for how you individually lead your own churches. Much of this will be perfectly applicable to what you're doing locally in your own church, but some of it will also be applicable to how you're thinking of working together in the future. The first of these two areas is this. It's about scattered church. It's about scattered church. It's time to release and resource the body to be the body. If there was ever a moment to build scattered church, it is now. With all of the limitations of coming together on a Sunday, back in our buildings with social distancing, with masks, with no singing, with no hugging. You know, it's such a stripped back version of what we know as gathered church. And we don't know how long we're going to be in this phase for. We don't know whether there's going to be a second spike, whether we'll be stopped from meeting centrally again, or whether it will go on into next year. We just don't know, and we can't keep waiting. We have to embrace what God is saying for now. And one of the things I'm sure he is talking about is scattered church. So this particular picture, I've been using this for the last couple of years, well before the pandemic, to talk about the fact that we need to shift the needle on mission and ministry from the gathered and scattered, from the gathered to the scattered, from the more consumerist mindset that says, I'm coming to church, get my fill for the week, go home and live it as I want to incarnational, where people are thinking, no, I'm encouraged in church so I can go and live out my Christian faith with my family, with my community of people that I meet with during the week, incarnationally, to bring the presence of God into my street, my neighborhood. That we start to think about resourcing and investing in the 166 hours per week that people are living their lives not in the building on a Sunday morning. 2 hours on a Sunday morning, 166 hours the rest of the week. Where are we investing our resources? How are we helping people be the church out there in that scattered, decentralized form? I think this is one of the key things that God is talking to us about, and that the pandemic has pushed us into, because we've not been able to meet centrally. And if we miss this, I think we will miss one of the most important things that God is trying to talk to us about. And the question is this: how are we investing in scattered church? Is it a temporary adaptation or a permanent realignment? Are we thinking of a temporary adaptation to a strange situation, or a permanent realignment of how we do church? So, obviously, the church for a long, long time has done church in small groups. That's nothing new. But how we do that is again being affected by the pandemic. And there are many, many ways of sharing life and doing mission in groups of 2 to 6. We use 6 at the moment because that's our limit, but obviously that may increase. Let's not forget that Jesus sent his disciples out 2 at a time into the towns and villages. He sent his disciples into mission in groups of 2. Let me just, by way of example, give a few thoughts on what this scattered church could look like. What about prayer walking? I'm sure many of your churches are already involved in prayer walking, but it's a fantastic opportunity for people to go out in pairs and pray for their neighborhood, pray for the streets, pray for their area around the church building, pray for the places that God has put on your heart as a church, individually or better still in pairs, asking, what are we seeing here? Lord, open our eyes to see this place as you see it. Asking, what would good news look like here? How could we meet needs in Jesus' name and be as well as say good news? What would it mean to break up the hard soil through prayer so that gospel seeds become planted, grow and bear fruit? A friend of mine called Giles in a church in Sheffield, he was so fed up with the pandemic that he thought he'd go for a prayer walk. And he followed one of these rivers through the city down to a park in the centre of town. And there he bumped into a lady who he had met before the lockdown. I think it was at the school gates. And through this woman who was a Christian, he also got to meet her husband, who was not a Christian. And the husband was clearly a person of peace. And before the lockdown, he started to meet with him and started to share scriptures with him. And of course, that's one of the things that just went out the window. And as he went down to the park that day, just praying and asking God for his purpose and plan to be outworked, who did he bump into but this lady again? And as he bumps into her, he discovers from her that her marriage is in real difficulty. Her partner would probably be very open to meeting up with Giles again. And long and short of it, that's exactly what has happened. And so through prayer walking, Giles reconnected with the partner and is now again looking at scriptures together with him. Just through prayer walking in our own district of Wavertree, a part of Liverpool, where myself and my family live. By the way, forgot to mention, I am married and I have 4 children and I have 8 grandchildren, so just to mention that. But where we live in Wavertree, there is, it's quite a rough area in some ways. It's got nice bits, it's got rough bits. And so we've been prayer walking the area for the last year or so, quite intentionally. Thinking, Lord, would you open up a way for us to connect with our community? Lord, would you just water this soil, stop it being so hard soil, Lord God. Create connection points for us. Show us who the people of peace are. You know, within 2 months of prayer walking in Wavertree, and I'm not saying this was entirely due to our prayers, but I'm sure they contributed, something happened. The first thing was that there was a very negative piece of press about Wavertree in a national newspaper. Secondly, a hostel tried to open on the high street and was planning to house people in recovery. And the rumours abounded of what kind of people would be coming there, that they'd be sort of pouring out on the streets, on our high street on a daily basis, that maybe people's children wouldn't be safe. I mean, people coming out of prison. There was all sorts of crazy rumours. And so it galvanized, these 2 things galvanized the community to come together. This is immediately after, within 2 months of regularly prayer walking our patch. And so public meetings were held, not that we initiated, but we were there, we were in the mix as a community of believers in our area. And there was, you know, it was comical, to be honest, some of the meetings that were held and the outrageous things that were being said. What happened as a result of that was there was a backlash, a positive backlash that said, let's not moan about the negatives, let's do something positive. And so the first things that started were litter picks. And so one of the girls in our missional community, in our neighbourhood, started to organise the litter picks as part of this Love Wavertree community. And that began just over a year ago. About this time last year, the idea was to do something that came out of this group, this Love Wavertree group that was beginning to emerge and coalesce, to do something on Car-Free Sunday. That's one day in the year there's a nominated Car-Free Sunday internationally. And so we got the police and the local authority to close down our high street. And we ran a big festival in the high street and we had a fantastic time. Off the back of that, the Love Wavertree community is doing regular litter picks. And there's been arts clubs and books clubs and running clubs have spawned off that. The whole community has started to come together. And you know, the prayers that we prayed while we were prayer walking are suddenly coming to fruition. And all sorts of new opportunities and connections are taking place. And because, you know, I have my People of Peace radar up most of the time when I'm out and about, I'm always thinking, I wonder if I'm going to meet any people of peace today. It's a great kind of radar antennae to have up when you're out and about. Pretty much every time I've done one of our litter picks, which happen monthly, I have had a quite clear spiritual conversation with someone I've been litter picking with, or I've chatted to at the end as we've gone into a local cafe. And it's been amazing how God has opened up our community, and I'm sure that prayer walking has been a part of that. And I love this scripture in Joshua 1. I'm sure you've preached off it many a time. Every place where the sole of your foot treads, I have given it to you. Missional households. We We may not be able to meet as traditional small groups, but we can encourage our households to become missional, to embrace a spiritual rhythm. One of the things that my own church, Frontline Church, has done all through the pandemic is place a really big emphasis on the phrase that John, the pastor, has been using is building an altar in the home. So deliberately not doing weekly online services through lockdown, just doing them less frequently, because he wanted to say, no, look, this is a season, it's a moment, it's an opportunity for you not to depend on the church for all your spiritual input. And a bit like in the video we saw that Anne shared about the bringing faith into our families. Getting parents to take spiritual responsibility, to build rhythms around, we talk about the 3 dimensions of church life of up, in and out, and I'm sure you're all familiar with that. But how do we grow in devotional and discipleship with the Lord? How do we grow in building our community together in the home? And how do we reach out as a community? Missional households, embracing those up, in and out rhythms, breaking bread together, inviting others round our table where we can do that. So one of the people I met, one of the litter picks who also runs the running club, who also happens to be a resident at the hostel on the high street, who have proved to be the most exemplary community members you could ever imagine, totally blowing everybody's expectation. They're always involved in every community activity, and they are such a blessing to our neighborhood. It's really amazing how they've turned the perception of who they are around. And one of the people who lives there is called Ian. And he's ex-military, he runs the running club, he's as fit as crazy. And I wanted to try and get into the hostel. I've been praying about this for a couple of months, saying I wonder if the hostel would allow me to come and run a group there, because they run all sorts of groups there. And so I was talking to Ian about this and thinking, how could I make contact with the people who lead the hostel? And as I'm talking to him, he's saying, well, what do you want to talk to them about? So I began to talk to Ian about wanting to run some kind of group around faith or spirituality for people who are interested. And as we got talking, he started talking about his background in the military and the number of times, he feels his life has been spared because someone was looking out for him. Someone was watching over him. And as we began to explore this dimension of faith and trusting in God, we realized that actually God's been at work in his life all the time, and he is now really open to faith conversations. He's been round to our house twice for a meal in the last 2 weeks. He's coming again tonight for a 3rd time. We're starting to study Scripture together and seeing if God will speak to him as we read Scripture together. He's well on a discipleship journey, and he is yet to give his life to Christ. Just because conversations start when we get out in public space. Conversations start when we prayer walk and look for people of peace. Conversations move from natural to spiritual. We talk about this in some of our training on the disciple maker's journey. And then we can invite them. We can invite them into our homes. We can have them into our missional households, because we see our homes as places of mission, not of self-protection. And often we see, home is castle. But actually, with wisdom and with caution, obviously, we see our tables as places we can invite people to have these conversations, and people find a place of belonging who are often on their own. Neighborhood Prayer Network, some of you may be aware of this already. It's something that we're going to be taking on, and we're working towards a New Year launch of this in the Liverpool City region. They've been in existence as a national organisation for about, I think, 7 or 8 years. A guy called Carl Brettel runs it, who used to be one of the leaders in UCB. And I think it's a fantastic opportunity, not just for individuals or just for churches, but potentially for churches working together. Now, I know you've already done a great project a couple of years ago during Thy Kingdom Come, where every street in Harrogate was being prayed for. I think this could take that idea to a whole new level for a number of reasons. So my research tells me that there's about 75,000 people living in Harrogate. I counted up all the streets on your A to Z to find out how many streets there were. It's got Streets beginning with A, 14. So I counted them all up, all through the alphabet, and you've got just under 1,500 streets in Harrogate. That's an average of 50 people per street, which is a lot less than the national average. A lot less. What if you had a Christian person or a Christian couple or a missional household in every street of Harrogate praying for their street? Connecting or partnering with Neighbourhood Prayer Network allows those people to be supported in what they're doing on a weekly basis through the emails that are sent, through stories that are shared, through prayer and other resources that are available free as downloads from their website. But they don't just stop at prayer. This is what I love about them. They're not just a prayer organization. That's the foundation, and it's going to be the foundation for anything that God wants to do in Harrogate. That undergirding, that foundation of prayer that causes the spiritual breakthrough before we see it in the natural. Before we see people turning to God, there's a victory to be won in prayer. There's ground that has to be plowed up in prayer. There's seed that has to be sown in prayer. But it's not just about prayer, it's also about caring. It's also about practical acts of kindness for the street that you live in. And they use this phrase, prayer, care, and share, because it then leads on to how can we encourage you to share good news with your neighbours? Prayer walking your street, asking God to give you insights to where the lonely people are, where the people are going through messy divorces, where are the kids who are in trouble with the law, where are people who are struggling financially on poverty or with isolation. Asking God to show you that for your own street so you can pray with intelligence, but also so that you can care with compassion, but you can also share with conviction that there's good news for every person. I'm really excited about that potential for our city region. I would love to have thousands of people owning their street, taking spiritual responsibility for their street, and not just for a 2-week period, for the long term, as a key strategy to reach every person, to bless every person, and to see the gospel multiply. I think Neighbourhood Prayer Network is another great thing that we can do with small groups of people. Final suggestion, in terms of small group, is what we call DNA groups. There's probably other names for them. We use the name DNA. It stands for discipleship, nurture, and accountability. And it's groups of 2 or 3 people that in their own time, at their own pace, with their own frequency, in other words, it requires virtually zero organization from the church leader, which is always a big tick for a church leader, to gather in 2s and 3s or 4s and just commit to praying for each other, to nurture one another, to support one another, to commit to listening for what God is saying to them for their Kairos moments, sharing in scripture reading together and sharing what God's saying through those scriptures, and being accountable to one another for spiritual growth and for missional courage in their daily lives. One of the churches that's been doing that really effectively is a church called Journey Communities Church in Bicester. They're one of the Kairos Connection churches. If you want to go on their website and have a look at what they're up to, there's loads of resources there. The website is journeycommunities.co.uk, and then you go /DNA for their pages on DNA groups. That's something we could do so easily, and we could see the spiritual temperature in our churches rise massively if we could get the majority of people in such small discipleship, nurture, and accountability groups, without ever having to preach a sermon, gather people on a Sunday, heat the building, take an offering. It's all free. It's all done out there. It's scattered church at its best. DNA groups. And I think the reason I talk a lot about mission is because I think mission is where the energy comes from in our lives and in church life. I thought about the time your kid first takes the plunge down that big slide in the playground. You remember that? And they, how tentatively they climb to the top, and you thought, oh, they're going to fall. No, they're not. And then, they're holding on for dear life at the top, and, they're petrified. but they shoot down, they get to the bomb and they jump up and they say, again, again, because they are so excited by what they've experienced. I think mission is a bit like that. You know, you have to wind yourself up because you feel scared, you feel afraid, you're fearing rejection, you feel terrified. But once you've done it, you think, yes, that's what life's about. 10 years ago, I remember throwing myself out of an airplane a few miles up in the sky, free fall parachuting to raise some money for a project in the Congo we were doing. I was absolutely terrified. I've never done parachuting, let alone free fall parachuting before. It was the biggest adrenaline rush of a lifetime. It was amazing. I'd be up there again tomorrow if I had the chance. Sometimes the things that we fear are the things that are the most rewarding and fulfilling in life. And I think mission generally, unless you're a hardcore evangelist, fits into that category for most church members. So what simple things could we be doing to build church, to extend church, to be missional church? And just a little thought along the way. Think about the persecuted church. They have similar restrictions right now. You know, they can't meet publicly. They have to meet more secretly. You know, they may get thrown into prison if they get caught meeting. Well, we don't get thrown into prison yet, but, you know, there's a £100 fine if you're doing it wrong. Okay, it's not the same scenario, I appreciate that. But some of the restrictions are the same. Why don't we just think for a moment about the persecuted church? How are they doing church? What could we learn from them? They are generally all about scattered church, small groups, meeting in homes, meeting in parks, meeting in the woods, taking the gospel, taking it out, because that's the greatest thrill and reward of their lives, is to be ambassadors for Jesus with the good news that has changed and shaped their lives. One of the things that we've trying to think about things that are simple, sticky and reproducible. It's often our little mantra for anything that we do in Kairos Connection. Is it simple? Can anybody understand it? Is it sticky? Is it easy to remember, recall? And is it reproducible so that we can pass it on to other people? It's a simple campaign. It's a national campaign. We've styled it after Boris's slogans. Bless your neighbour, build community, bring good news. And so we've been trying to do that, and other churches around the country have been doing that during lockdown. Just a few little stories as we come into land. This is you can see up in the top left-hand corner, a derelict back alley between two rows of houses. So Greg and Martha, who are part of our missional community, met with some of their neighbours during lockdown and thought, you know, this is a really wasted space. It's just growing weeds, there's a few wheelie bins. It's wasted. Why don't we do something together as neighbours? And you can see the result of their efforts. They have created an amazing space for gathering, holding parties. That's Martha's, top right is Martha's baby shower party they held in their back alley. You can see some of the decoration they brought to it. And it not only caught the local newspaper, it caught the Guardian newspaper, it caught ITV and BBC 6 o'clock news features, because it was such a great example of building community. Bless our neighbour, build community, and into that context, bring good news. How can we help our members do that with their neighbours? Because lockdown has given us all sorts of opportunities to care for shielding people, to get prescriptions or shopping, to look out for people who are isolated. You know, it's already now in the psyche of many of our church members to be blessing our neighbours. Let's build on that to say, how can you now build community? Which is what we've been doing in Love Wavertree, building community. And into that context, looking for the people of peace, bringing good news. Once Greg and Martha did this in their community, another couple in another community have done the same in their back alley now. It's kind of catching on a bit. It's been a great experience. Another church down on the south coast in Deal, Anglican church. The first thing that happened for them was during lockdown, somebody rang them. They got the telephone number on the church door and said, a woman said, my husband has died of COVID and I'm distraught, I'm distressed, I don't know what to do. And so Sheila, one of the ministers there, met up with her, but she didn't just meet up and think, okay, what can I do to help this lady? She thought, how can I use this moment to raise up other leaders, to introduce this woman to other people in my church. And so she brought along 2 of her missional community leaders, her small group leaders, to meet with this woman at the same time. And they had a great time. The woman was really open to spiritual things. And as a result of that, this woman has now become a regular part of one of those missional communities. It's not what we can't do, it's what we can do. It's not about the impossible, it's about what's possible. They had some baptisms they wanted to do, new believers coming to faith. And so obviously there's restrictions around that. They managed to think about, they thought, well, what can we do? Well, we can meet in the open air, that was fine. The acts of baptism itself, they used people from that person's own household to do the baptizing, so they weren't breaking the rules there. They sung in the open air on the beach. They sung Amazing Grace, amongst other songs. And there were swimmers in the sea at the time. And as they were swimming back to the shore, they said, we heard this amazing sound of Amazing Grace coming across the waters to us. Other people who were just turning up on the beach were all watching and listening to the preaching that was taking place. They prepared some little testimony flyers from those who were being baptized, and people on the beach could get hold of them. It's about what's possible, not what's impossible. What can we do, not what can't we do? I think the bottom right there was Chris, the other minister, telling the story of the fish that got away. But they had a great time on that day. So I've mentioned the litter picking in Love Wavertree. That has led to a charity shop being opened on the high street, all of these groups being opened up as a result of it, and my ongoing connection with this young man called Ian. All been very, very exciting. The 4 points is something that was created in our church. If you don't recognize that beast on the left, it's the Liverpool emblem of our Capital of Culture year, 2008. It's called a lamb banana, for obvious reasons. We managed to get hold of one and got the 4 points on it. It's on the roof of our church building. I've got them on the side of my car. I wear the wristband all the time. A delivery man from Amazon came along a few weeks back and saw it on the side of the car. Said, what do those things on the side of your car mean? Well, can I tell you a story? And so we got into the story of God creating the world, a perfect place for you and me, of how we messed that up, that Jesus came to point us back in the right direction, to forgive us, to reconnect us with God's plan and purpose for our lives. And the question mark, of course, is what are you going to do about it? Those simple things of carrying a tract, wearing a wristband, there's some down there if you're interested. There's also an opportunity to anyone who's interested in actually buying some bulk orders of these. I don't get any commission on these, I promise you. But there's such a great resource, such a simple tool for our mission. If you can bulk buy the tracts, you can get your own church's name and details printed on the back of them. There are times when those print runs are happening. It's all on the flyers. You can see it all there. But it's about what you can do. How do we mobilize our members into mission at this time? How do we equip them to speak to their neighbors, to have these gospel conversations? So that was my first point. Now you're really panicking, Sam. My second point is this, and it's actually my final point. If we are believing that God is speaking about how we can equip individuals and release small groups in different ways during this season, then the other thing I think he's saying, there's not only a small group thing, but there's an online thing going on here. And you will be very aware of using how the acceleration of online opportunities has taken place during lockdown. Now, I'm not a digital native, okay, so I didn't grow up with the internet. I'm having to catch up all the time. But I just have a fundamental conviction that it's time to start releasing digital leaders. People who will be an equal member of our leadership team, as if they were responsible for pastoral care or mission or small groups. Who's the digital leader in our church? Who's the person that is not just our techie person that we bring in to help solve our problems, which is often all that they are. No, we want to release people into leadership for the digital world in which we are now living, because of the opportunities that exist, not only to serve our members well, but also to reach a whole unreached audience. Obviously, there's social media, there's all sorts of local networks. Somebody said to me, how do I find out? How do I make connections in my neighborhood? Where I live, I'm actually quite isolated in a flat. There's no other people living near me. Well, go on to Nextdoor. Most places have got a Nextdoor community in their town, in their city, in their neighborhood. Go and find out who's out there. Use social media. How can I use them, social media in evangelism? There's plenty of apps. Yes, He is a great app worth exploring. All sorts of resources there. Alpha Online you'll be familiar with. Try Praying. You can send the booklet digitally to people through their website. Obviously, there's our own personal Facebook, Instagram opportunity for posting things. There's video training. All of our training is now available through videos online. This is the world in which we live. And you don't need me to tell you that, but I just want to encourage you to fully explore all of the online opportunities that exist. If you want to look at where our resources are, you can take one of the sheets there, or you can go to kairosconnection.teachable.com, where all of our training things are hosted. A lot of my time I spend helping people think about the how-to of church. My last book, which just came out a month or two back, called Bride, as Sam said, it's about becoming the church that Jesus died for and is coming back for. It's about the why-to. Why would we want to live this life? Why would we want to be this kind of church? Why would we want to embrace sacrifice and cost in order to be something glorious and beautiful, ready for Christ's return? It takes you through a whole series of different ideas around what this church could, might, and should look like. And again, that's available if you would like a copy of that. Sam, back to you.